When we think of the golden age of Hollywood, a few names probably come to mind immediately. Elizabeth Taylor, Clark Gable, Humphrey Bogart, Audrey Hepburn, and, of course, James Dean.
Hi!
I was just thinking that once you've been up there, you know you've been someplace.
Which is kind of wild when you think about the fact that Dean only starred in 3 films before his untimely death. Yet even with only 3 starring roles to his name, James Dean became a cultural icon of old Hollywood, youth, and sexuality. Yet, most interestingly, he's gone on to become a gay icon as well.
How did you get here?
I hitched.
I bet you'd go to a hanging.
I wonder why. Invoking James Dean's name has essentially become pop cultural shorthand for conveying themes of youthful rebellion, of smoldering sexuality, of a certain devil-may-care attitude, of living life on the edge. In short, live fast, die young, bad girls do it well. He set a standard for male beauty, with several actors and models striving to capture his look and aesthetic. James Dean was like a proto-Leonardo DiCaprio or Timothée Chalamet, in that he was a teen heartthrob who garnered a lot of publicity, but was also a serious actor, wanted to be taken seriously. Yet, though almost everyone probably knows who James Dean is, most people these days haven't even seen a James Dean movie. Essentially, the image of James Dean and the cultural signifiers he embodies have overtaken his actual body of work. In many ways, Dean can be seen as something of a spear counterpart to Marilyn Monroe. Both were stars during the golden age of Hollywood, they were both sex symbols, both of them died young, and they've both remained fixations of pop culture long after their deaths. I was also certain that that James Dean quote that I opened this video with was like a Marilyn Monroe style misquote, but I did a little digging and apparently it's real. Also important to note that James Dean, like Marilyn Monroe, has become the victim of cultural grave robbery, with his image managed for commercial use by CMG worldwide. And soon he'll even be coming back to the big screen in a theater near you when his Uncanny Valley CGI likeness stars in the Vietnam War film Finding Jack. And there have already been countless articles about how tasteless and insulting this is, so I'm not gonna really get into it here, except to say that finding distant relatives of James Dean who probably didn't even know him to sign off on this, and therefore profit off of it, is not the same thing as respecting James Dean's memory. Just saying. Dean's 3 starring roles were in East of Eden, Rebel Without a Cause, both of which were released in 1955, and finally Giant, released in 1956, the latter 2 released after his death. While Giant was Dean's final film role, it's much less well known than his other 2, at least in part because this was the first time he was sort of playing against type and breaking out of that angsty teenage loner box that he'd been so associated with, but also because the movie's just really long and not very good.
My welcome in, babe.
Much more interesting and relevant to the James Dean legacy and his cult of personality are his other 2 films, East of Eden and, of course, Rebel Without a Cause.
Talk to me, Father. I gotta know who I am. I gotta know what I'm like. I gotta know.
Based on the 1952 John Steinbeck novel of the same name, East of Eden focuses on a wayward teenager named Cal Trask, who vies for his father's affection against his brother, Aaron. It's essentially a retelling of the biblical story of Cain and Abel, with Cal as the unfavored of his father, troubled, rebellious, lonely, prone to acting out.
You never really loved us. I know why you didn't love me.
It's a good movie, and a lot of that can be attributed to Dean's performance. And some of his acting choices in this movie are truly bizarre, but in a good way. The mannerisms he gives Cal, they paint a portrait of someone who is not altogether there. The relationship between Cal and his father echoes Dean's own estranged relationship with his father, and he channels a lot of that into his performance. The most famous example is the scene in which Cal's father rejects his birthday gift. Originally, Cal's reaction was supposed to be more angry, but Dean instead plays it for tragedy and has him just break down.
Cow! Cow!
East of Eden wound up being the only film released during James Dean's lifetime, and the only one he personally saw in its entirety. The next year, he was posthumously nominated for Best Actor for his performance. But it was later that same year that we got Dean's most famous film, the one that solidified his image in the zeitgeist.
I know one thing. I'm not going back in that zoo.
I'm never going back.
Rebel Without a Cause is a melodrama about a group of angst-ridden suburban middle-class teens living in Los Angeles whose parents just don't understand them.
Want my jacket? It's warm.
It's also super gay.
Why didn't you take my jacket?
Just like the gayest film ever.
Hey, you want to come home with me? I mean, there's nobody home at my house. Heck, I'm not tired. Are you?
Dean plays Jim Stark, a social outcast who has a rocky relationship with his parents and gets into all sorts of trouble as a result.
Please lock me up. I'm gonna hit somebody. I'm gonna do something I don't...
And he has so many feelings.
You're tearing me apart!
What?
You're tearing me apart, Lisa!
In case you haven't noticed, there's something of a trend here. The other central characters are Judy, played by Natalie Wood, who...
What's the matter with you? You're getting too old for that kind of stuff, kiddo. I thought you'd stop doing that long ago.
I didn't want to stop.
wants to bone her dad?
Girls your age don't do things like that.
And Plato, played by Sal Mineo, whose mother is often away and whose father left them, leaving him in the care of his housekeeper. He's also introduced after having killed a litter of puppies, which, yike, but we're gonna ignore that because he's a cinnamon roll.
Oh, I wish we could stay here.
Most of the film takes place over the course of one night where the three characters' lives become entangled after a game of chicken goes horribly wrong and a strange friendship forms between the three of them. And while the melodrama of this movie may be easy to dismiss nowadays because the same themes have been done to death by your OCs, your One Tree Hills, your Degrassi's, it shocked audiences at the time of its release. It was the rare film that actually focused on the experiences of teenagers and even dared to sympathize with them, and showed how parents can emotionally damage their children by being overbearing, or neglectful, or absent.
If you want to come, we could talk, and in the morning we could have breakfast like my dad used to.
Did I mention how gay this movie is?
I'll see you in the morning, okay?
The energy of this movie is just overwhelmingly gay.
It's warm. Here, my jacket. It's warm.
Can I keep it?
Well, what do you think?
And I don't mean in like a tee-hee, oh look, two boys are publicly displaying affection for each other, they must be homos way. I mean like, the homoeroticism is basically text. Rebel Without a Cause was directed by Nicholas Ray, who is bisexual. Sal Mineo was also bisexual and was encouraged by Ray to portray Plato as gay. And so there's this palpable undertone to all of Plato's interactions with Jim that is distinctly queer. And clearly I'm not the only one who's noticed. It's very easy to interpret the relationship between Jim and Plato as a romantic one. Meanwhile, Natalie Wood is over here like, well, if I can't fuck my dad, I guess I'll just settle for this fat. And we haven't even gotten into James Dean's sexuality. Speaking of, let's talk about James Dean's sexuality. Dean's ambiguous sexuality has been a defining aspect of his icon status since even before his death. Though he was on record as stating that he was not a homosexual, it was also, you know, the 50s. So, you know. Dean's first biographer, William Bast, who is also one of his close friends, definitely made it clear that Dean wasn't straight. Nicholas Ray and Elizabeth Taylor, who starred alongside Dean in Giant, outright said that he was gay.
All of my life I've spent a lot of time with gay men, Montgomery Clift, Jimmy Dean, Rock Hudson.
We'll never know exactly what James Dean's sexual orientation was, but it's probably safe to assume he was not straight. And even if he was straight, which, again, he most likely was not, that doesn't mean that his films don't have a distinctly homoerotic subtext. And I mean, just look at him. While the title of Urtwink probably belongs to, I don't know, Apollo, James Dean remains the poster boy for the modern twink aesthetic. That's powerful. Actually, now that I think about it, maybe he's more of a twunk. Where's a BuzzFeed quiz when you need one? And we haven't even talked about the screen tests yet. There's this one between Dean and Paul Newman.
Now look at each other.
Just surly.
Now what do you think of each other?
Wow! No, we can't print that.
Tie them up.
Kiss me. Can't hear.
And then this one between him and East of Eden co-star Richard Davalos, who plays his brother Aaron.
It's so easy. Show him. Tell him.
Oh, you show him.
Go up to him and tell him that you love him. Anything.
This scene got cut because they were worried it would look incestuous. Gay. The very idea of James Dean as a cultural icon of disillusionment and social estrangement is, in and of itself, inherently queer. Like, what gay person hasn't felt like an outcast or had a strained relationship with their parents? And these themes are there in all of his films. It's there in East of Eden. It's definitely there in Rebel Without a Cause. Hell, it's even there in Bloated, Boring, Way Too Long Giant, with the characters portrayed by Dean and Rock Hudson, who was actually gay, engaging in some very homoerotic rivalry. And if we're to believe the rumors from set, this actually carried over into real life, with Dean and Hudson fighting over the friendship of Queen of the Hags, Elizabeth Taylor. The drama. Dean also had a distinct acting style that's featured in all of his film roles, characterized by sincerity, vulnerability, raw and frankly uncomfortable emotionality. These all cohere into a vision of masculinity that is frankly still pretty subversive today, to say nothing of the 50s, and contributed to what was called by some his androgynous on-screen presence, in which he could alternate from smoldering sexuality to emotional vulnerability. But I think the reason for James Dean's status as a gay icon goes beyond him just being twink supreme, or the fact that his films are laden with queer subtext, or even the fact that he may have been queer himself. No, I think it goes deeper than that. James Dean died September 30th, 1955 at the age of 24 due to fatal injuries he sustained from a car accident. See, he was like really into cars and auto racing, and even competed in some professional races.
Jimmy, we probably have a great many young people watching our show tonight, and for their benefit, I'd like your opinion about fast driving on the highway. Do you think it's a good idea?
I used to fly around quite a bit, you know. I took a lot of unnecessary chances. And now I drive on the highways, and I'm extra cautious.
The James Dean quote I opened this video with shocked me when I first read it, because in hindsight, it seems borderline prophetic. And honestly, it's his tragic death way before his time that is probably the biggest contributor to his cultural cachet. After Dean's death, Humphrey Bogart stated, "Dean died at just the right time. He left behind a legend. If he had lived, he'd never have been able to live up to his publicity." So, what does this have to do with being a gay icon? Well, because he died young, James Dean's image is forever immortalized as the one seen in those films he made. Young, handsome, troubled but charming. He never had the chance for that image of him to change, to mature, to age into something else. In death, he is forever young. And I don't know if you've noticed, but a lot of gay men have a really bad relationship with the thought of aging, like an existential angst. And while this attitude often borders on the mimetic and absurd, I think there is a sincere anxiety that a lot of queer men have about the thought of aging, or gay death as it is so amusingly called. Gay death, which occurs around 30, is the supposed time when gay men are no longer found attractive or desirable. So if you're 25, you're basically middle-aged. If you're 40 or over, you may as well be the grizzled corpse of Oscar Wilde. This is, of course, ridiculous, but it cuts to a very real fear that a lot of gay men have. I'm only 25 and still look like a bouncing baby twink, so I haven't seriously dealt with this anxiety yet. Then again, I still have all my hair, but as soon as it starts balding or receding, whew, sweaty, you bet that I will be entering a full gay panic. However, at 25, I've already outlived James Dean. And in 5 years, I'll be 30. That's frightening. And on the one hand, this fear, silly as it may seem, it's understandable. We live in a beauty-obsessed world where we all have smartphones with HD cameras for us to gawk at our flaws all day long and scroll through pictures of younger, hotter people. And while most men struggle with body image, queer men have it especially hard. For us, youth and beauty are very valuable sexual currencies, and age only causes them to depreciate over time. And of course, all queer people usually deal with a state of arrested development, most of us having spent our formative years in the closet. As succinctly phrased by this tweet, gay culture is being a teenager when you're 30 because your teenage years were not yours to live. As a result, most of us aren't able to take full advantage of our youth when we have it. There's also the reality that there hasn't been much of a template for what life as an older gay man even looks like. In no small part due to the AIDS crisis, in which, like James Dean, countless queer men died way before their time. So for the last few decades, there hasn't even been a coherent vision for what life beyond 30 for gay men could even look like. Now, obviously, I'm painting with broad strokes here. There have been dusty old queens since time immemorial. And there are plenty of older gay men now whom we apparently refer to as daddies. Ugh, I hate us. I hate gays. But the fact remains that for most queer men, we don't have an intimate understanding of what it means to exist as middle-aged men. And because we don't understand it, we fear it, and we don't like it. And twink deity James Dean exemplifies this desire to have one's image crystallized as young and beautiful. And that's not to say that gay men belong to a death cult or anything like that. I mean, I've been ready for the cold embrace of death since I was like 5, but that's just me. But in that sense, there's almost something aspirational about James Dean. But it's not. There's nothing aspirational or glamorous about dying young. James Dean could have had a career on par with Marlon Brando, or maybe his stardom would have fizzled out. He could very well still be alive today. He'd be Clint Eastwood's age. But we'll never know because he died just as his career was getting started. And as gay men, we need to learn to come to terms with our own mortality and the fact that one day we will age. And that's a privilege. And we may have to figure out on our own what middle age will look like for us. And that's okay. Or I guess you can always become a famous movie star and then die tragically and have Hollywood resurrect your twink body for the big screen.